My name's Mark. I work for Focusrite and Novation. So we may have bumped into either the last couple of days or perhaps at a few shows. But for those that don't know, Focusrite and Novation, we have probably about a good sort of 80% of people are working musicians as well. So I myself am a DJ and producer of 23 years now. I'm actually one half of a production duo called South of the Stars, which is a trance act. We've had a lot of success recently releasing a few tracks on Alter Ego Records, which is a trance label in the UK here. And I've run record labels in the past and received quite a lot of support from a few big acts like Armin Van Buuren, Paul Van Dyk, Tiesto, and a few people that we supplied music for in the past. So I thought today's seminar content, I gather everyone wasn't here yesterday, so this is a mirror of the one that we did yesterday. Today's session is kind of all about mashups and the mashup culture and why it's so important to create your own mashups. And we was kind of telling the story yesterday as where the mashups kind of really come from. And for me personally, my opinion is that back when I started, we were mixing vinyl, and you know, as a DJ, your vinyl collection told the story of the identity of who you were, and that kind of made you stand out from the rest of the crowd. So, you know, if you had something that was like a limited press or you know, a test press or a dub plate or something, you stood out from everyone else because you were completely different, individualistic, and that's what drew people to come and see you, because you sounded different to everyone else. So really, I think that's where the mashup culture kind of comes from, because we as a technology company, we make so many amazing products that can literally give you really, really fast results, which is fantastic. So in terms of technology, creatively, it's helping musicians and DJs. And the flip side of that is that because it's become easier to do and easier to make, then there's more people that are actually doing it. So it's more apparent that you've got to stand out and you've got to be unique and different. And that's where I think the mashup culture comes from, because what it does is it gives you something that is unique to your sets. So makes you sound different and interesting and creative, and that's why people are going to come and see you. So that's where I kind of see where the mashup culture come from and why it's so important. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to recreate a mashup that I did earlier on in the year, which will get us into kind of like the track selection. So where to kind of really base your mashup around. So, you know, it could be something that's like a classic record, a classic house record from back in the day, or even a pop tune. And you're kind of taking elements of it and parts of it, and then creating your own track from those parts. So track selection is a really, really important thing, and why you're actually doing the mashup itself. So, you know, for example, this was to promote a single that we did earlier on this year. So the track that we're going to use as the kind of backbone for the mashup is a track of our own, which is called New Dawn, and was released on Alter Ego Records earlier this year. So we're just going to take a brief listen to that track. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to be working with, and that's basically what we're going to use as the backbone of the mashup. And the track that we're going to use to kind of create the mashup with that track is actually a vocal tune, which is by Cosmic Gate, and it basically uses the vocal talents of a singer called Jess Bryden, who was really famous for singing on a track called As the Rush Comes. So we're just going to check that one and solo this one, and we'll check this one out as well.
There may not ever be a perfect time. Every second waiting for a sign. It's like you're either with me or against me. And you know you can't wait forever.
So you can see that track in itself is like a really kind of broken down vocal track. Like there's no sort of 4/4 rhythm to it at all. And what really kind of drew us to that was we listened to the Cosmic Gate album and thought, it's an amazing track with amazing vocals, but there was no club mix, so you couldn't like play it out or anything. So, and just so happens it is in exactly the same key harmonically as our track, which is an A minor. So, on to the next important thing is the tracks that you're using obviously harmonically have to kind of work together. So, I buy a lot of my tracks from Beatport, and that gives you a lot of the information you're going to need for the mashup, which is like the key that it's in, A minor, which we're using. But also like the BPM as well. So let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to actually warp the tracks we're going to be using. So if you're not familiar with Ableton, warping is essentially kind of time stretching, and especially when you're beat matching or DJing or using Ableton, everything kind of has to be in time. So when it's warped and in time, basically whenever we kind of move up the project tempo or the speed, the stretching and everything's going to come in on the correct bars that we want. So it makes sure everything's in time. And we're going to show you a really, really quick, simple way of warping tracks in Ableton. And again, I'll point out that this is just my way. There's tons of theories and ways you should do it and stuff like that. But this is literally the way that I find is the most easiest. Like I see so many people online really getting into like the waveform and moving some of the transient markers around and doing lots of work with warping. But generally, if you use a kind of really simple technique, you don't have to do too much work. So we said about some of the information that you get from the tracks when you're buying them from like Beatport or Juno or wherever. Two things you basically need to know when you're warping. One is the BPM, and the other is where you want that particular piece or that track to start. So we're just going to do the backbone of the track, which is the New Dawn track. And all you need to do is say, is just find out where you want the track to start and know the BPM. So I know, for example, that our track is 132 beats per minute. So we've set the project tempo at 132. And then what we're going to do is just literally zoom in on the waveform down here and go to the first bar. And you can see that it's not kind of got the cue point where we want it. So what we're going to do is move this playhead here up to start of the first transient where the first kick drum is. And you can zoom in, get really, really graphic about this, but we'll just do it as quick as we possibly can. One of the cool things I like about Ableton Live 10 is they've kind of added this snapping. So when you're kind of moving things about, and you'll see the automation later that we're doing, they've added this really cool feature where it snaps to the bar. So it makes it really easy for doing stuff like this. So what we're going to do is just move the playhead up onto the transient there of the first kick drum, and we're just going to right-click and set 1.1 from here. And what that's going to do is pretty much kind of warp at 132 beats per minute. And you can see on the sample information here in the segment BPM that it's now set to 132 beats per minute. And there's different types of warping algorithms that Ableton can use, which is like beats, tones. You can see them here, repitch, complex, complex pro. The setting that I personally use is complex. Especially when you're like using vocal tracks as we are in a moment. Using it on the standard beats, it tends to get this kind of, yeah, the algorithm doesn't quite work in terms of vocal tracks. So I use Complex. You can use Complex Pro, but Complex Pro is quite kind of CPU hungry, so I'd kind of just stick to Complex. And then what I do is, obviously, if you do DJ, one of the most important things is like the first kind of like, 16 bars and the end 16 bars, making sure that they're 100% in time. Obviously, when you're mixing, you don't want to be fighting against the pitch of the track, trying to get it in time. So what I tend to do now is just kind of just zoom in on a few of the bars. So the 8th bar here, for example, and just check that that's actually kind of landing on the bar, which looks pretty good. So, and then what we do is just check a few more down the line. So 14 looks good. So I'm pretty happy with the warping there. And then what I would do is just check the end as well. So just to make sure we don't get any surprises later on. So everything looks pretty good. So that's a real quick, easy way to do warping. Now, we know that not every track is kind of 4/4, rhythms, kick drums, etc. So one of the things you can tend to bump into is when we're, for example, looking at a vocal tune or working with a vocal tune, something that doesn't have like a structured kind of 4/4. So what we actually need to do is find a cue point. Much like when you're DJing using CDJs, we need to find a cue point. So we're looking for a point in the track where we want it to start, what we're going to be using. So in this particular case, what we did was find the start of the piano. So kind of there where the piano actually starts. That's where our cue point is going to begin. So, and also where the vocal starts as well. So right there, where that piano hits, right there. And again, because we've got this track from Beatport, I know that the BPM of the vocal track is 126 beats per minute. So what I'm going to do is just slow the project tempo down to 126. This will be important when we're checking it against the metronome as well. So we slow it down to 126. And then what we're going to do is find the cue point down here. So right there. And then what we need to do is go and get the playhead and then drag this right up to here. And then we're going to start that literally on that piano. Zoom in quite close. So I'm pretty happy that cue point starts on the piano there. So what we're going to do is just right-click that again, set 1.1 from here, and then what I'm going to do is check the segment BPM. And again, if you know the BPM, you can simply just type in 126 into the segment BPM, and you can see that it just kind of stretched everything and snapped it into place. So what I'm going to do now is turn on the metronome, and then just double check that this is sitting nicely in time.
May not ever be a perfect time. Every second waiting for a sign. It's like it.
What I'm listening to with the metronome there is just listening to where the piano drops and making sure it drops in time with the metronome.
There may not ever be a perfect time. Every second waiting for a sign.
So pretty happy with that. So that's just a real kind of simple warping technique, not to be sort of sitting there for ages, spending time dragging kind of transient markers about. So we're pretty happy with this now. So now we can kind of start to begin about arrangement, where we're going to kind of make the cuts and make the mashup. So what we did in this particular project was find the breakdown in the New Dawn track. So we'll just find that. And speed it back up to 132 beats per minute. So right on that breakdown is where we're going to bring in the vocal track. So right where that boom is and the breakdown begins. So And push that up onto there. And because of our warping now, the vocal tune will sit in time perfectly at 132. So let's just listen to them both together.
May not ever be a perfect time. Every second waiting for a sign. It's like you're either with me or against me.
So you can see where we're going to be kind of using this, but the transitions sound really, really fuzzy at the moment. So we're going to work on some of the transitions. And then what we're going to do is just make a cut, because what we did in this particular project was have the outro happening just before the main lead breaks in. So what I'm going to do is just make a quick cut there, and a shortcut is Command and E. And then what it does is just literally cuts the vocal track down, and then we can just delete that portion of it as well. So basically the end transition, after it crosses into the vocal tune and then back into the backbone of New Dawn, will then go into this lead sound.
Let me ask again.
Okay, so it's going to transition and then move back into the lead sound. And again, the transitions sound a little bit fuzzy at the moment. So what we're going to do is work on some of the transitioning. So what we can actually do is, if we solo the top track, just listen to a point that we can help maybe take some of the little parts of the track and just, again, just soften that transition and make that transition nice and smooth. So those kind of synthy type plucks in a loop is a good way that we can maybe kind of shorten this down, create our own kind of little loop, just to kind of soften the transition a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just move into the project and select a portion of those kind of synth plucks to perhaps loop. And what I'm listening out for is something that hasn't got too much going on, because there's a lot of kind of crashes, and you've got the big sort of like reverbs and delay on the tail of the crash. So we're trying to need to do that, because basically when you loop that, it's going to sound a little bit silly. So these kind of plucks here, plucky kind of synth sounds, just going to make a cut here. And just find a portion of this that we can reuse. Great, so I'm actually going to use that part there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shorten this whole piece. So we're going to get rid of this, essentially. And as we want it to transition right into where that lead kicks in, just going to move this right up to where that comes back in. Excellent, and we can work on this transition in a second. Okay, so we should get a nice kind of sweeping effect into the lead sound in a moment. So this transition will sound, give you some sort of impression how we're going to come out of this. So it's going to sweep up into that lead sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to find this loop that we've kind of created here. And just going to duplicate this out. So to duplicate is Command and D. So if I just solo the top track, you'll hear that we're kind of creating a loop with these kind of synthy type plucks. We haven't quite got that loop right, but you kind of get the idea. Just going to duplicate this out as well now. And what I'm doing now is just extending this so you kind of get the full vocal as well. So I'm just going to move the top track aside. And then you can hear in the vocal track at the bottom, there's actually a drop which comes in here. So what I need to do is I need to copy these loops right out to that point. So it should now come in.
With a leap of faith.
So we've got this nice synthy type pluck loop that's going to help us kind of blend into the vocal track. Really soften that transition.
'Cause we're way past now or never. Sometimes you gotta jump with a leap of faith. If not
So we created a nice little loop there that's just literally going to soften that transition, get us into the other track, and then once the vocal's finished, we'll sweep up into the nice lead. Okay, so arrangement-wise, it's looking pretty good. We've now used the vocal track. We've created a little transition at the beginning. And also what you can do to help transitions is also take other parts of the track to help out. So, and in fact, what we actually did with this mashup was take a reverse piano. So if I just extend the vocal track out, there's a really, really nice sweeping piano. If we just solo it again. So that sweeping kind of reverse piano. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to find that section. And I'm just going to make a cut after it. And we're going to take this back to where we wanted it originally. So we've now got this nice kind of, that kind of sweeping reverse piano. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to bring that back up to the front where we wanted our vocal to start. So what it's going to do again is just create a nice, interesting, creative transition. So if we just unsolo it, you can hear what that's going to sound like. So we get that kind of really, really nice, sweeping kind of reverse sound. So also what you can do is, add in some of your own elements of percussion or effects. We added more than I'm going to add now, but just to show you a couple of things, you can go into some of your samples. This is a Trance Nights pack that I got actually from Beatport as well. And if we go into the hits, into some crashes, if we want to, we can kind of drag one of those into the channel as well. And we can also add our own kind of extra percussion and effects as well. So what we can do is turn it a little bit down. It's quite loud. So now we've got the structure and the arrangement, we're starting to add, different layers to the mashup from our own sample library as well. So as well as arrangement-wise, what we can do in terms of like transitions is also use automation to help us as well. So automation in Ableton Live 10, they've actually changed it a little bit. They've got this automation button, and when you turn this on and off, you can see the automation lanes. So what we're actually going to do is automate the track volume of each one, again, just to help with the transitions and stuff as well. So I'll just show you what we mean here. So on the vocal track, what I'm going to do is go to the mixer, and we're going to use the track volume, the parameter of the track volume. And then where this end transition happens to go back into the lead of the other track, we're going to make like a nice little sort of volume cut. So at the moment, it just sounds a little bit too rough. If we listen to it before. So what I actually want to do is I want to cut all of that atmospherics from the other track straight off. So we just make a couple of points, and then we drag the end down here, and that's going to automate the volume down. We're just going to play around with this a little bit until we get it right. Just going to shorten that up a little bit. So it's already sounding a lot cleaner by just making some little automation cuts on the track volume. And we're also going to do that here as well. So where the full transition happens from the first track into the second track. So it's kind of synthy type plucks. So what we'll do again is go up to the track 1, go to mixer. Want to automate the track volume. And again, just set some points for the automation, and then bring the track volume down. So let's take a listen, see how that sounds. So again, just helps that transition of smoothing it into the other track as well. So in terms of automation, that can help us as well. But also what we can do is just soften up the beginning as well. which kind of brings me on to mixing when you're doing mashups. The important thing to remember about doing mashups is you're using files that are already mastered. They've gone through the mastering process, so they're already a finished, polished product. So the most important thing is you don't want to be adding, any kind of EQ, compression, limit anything, because you're basically going to affect the track's content anyway. So it's key to remember that you're using mastered files, so there's no need to add any processing at all. But one thing you can do in terms of automation as well is you can use an automated EQ to kind of help again with the transitions. So what we actually did in this track is used an EQ8 on the vocal track. So just to show you how I'm going to use this, I'm going to drop it onto the vocal track, track 2. And at the moment, what you can hear between the two tracks is they're fighting a lot in terms of frequencies. So especially in kind of like the low end on the second track. So if you listen to the pianos along with the other track, it just sounds a little bit. So what we did is literally kind of make like a low EQ cut just to kind of, kind of give the tracks a little bit of space. So what I'm going to do is just make a low cut here and just round off some of the low frequencies. So if we just listen to the vocal track and solo.
There may not ever be a perfect time. Every second waiting for us.
So that's with the EQ on. If we listen to it off.
There may not ever be a perfect
and then back on.
time. Every second waiting for.
So if we leave it on and now play both the tracks together, you'll hear that it just kind of rounds off some of the low frequencies, but gives like doesn't like, kind of just gives the vocal a little bit more, without affecting the vocal. You can still hear that pretty predominantly in the track. So we'll just play them both together now. But we're going to kind of create ourselves our own problem, because when this transition happens, we're going to lose some of that impact of the low frequencies, and I'll show you what I mean. So when that kind of switches over, we've lost the low end completely, which we don't want to do. We want to get that big kind of impact of the tracks, switching over. So what we can actually do again is use automation to automate the EQ itself. What we're actually going to do is select the EQ8, and of all the parameters we want to use, we're just going to simply use like the device on-off parameter. So what that's going to do at the moment, the EQ is on because we're using it to kind of round off some of those low frequencies. But then we want it to come back on when the switch happens. So we can just make a couple of automation points and then make a drastic cut that's literally going to switch the EQ off and on. So I'll show you what we mean. So this is with the EQ on, and then if you just pay attention to the device down here, it'll be on and then it'll switch itself off.
Oh, never. Sometimes you gotta jump with a leap of faith. If not now.
So you can hear we get that big impact of the bass switching over, and we get that nice boomy kind of transition, which is what we want. And ultimately, if you're playing it out, you're going to get that impact on the dance floor as well. So that's how we can use automation to actually just give us, again, subtle help when it comes to transitioning as well. So in terms of, we've warped tracks, we've looked at arrangement, we've made some cuts, we've helped with transitioning. The final part of what we would actually do is just kind of balance and mix things out. And again, just to point out again, you would spend a lot of time on this, obviously just making sure I get it right. But we are dealing with mastered files, so we don't need to do any processing at all. So it'd just be a case of kind of balancing the two of them out. And I don't put anything on the master channel at all. We literally just balance the volumes as close to 0 dB as possible, and then export from there as well. So just spend the time mixing that just before exporting. So if we just listen to the final playthrough of our mashup. So that's basically, in effect, how you can take 2 tracks. Again, you know, I've seen people use 3, 4, you know, elements of other tracks, and just really create something uniquely that's yours and your own, and then it's going to make you stand out individual from tons of people that are, you know, playing the same music or doing the same thing. So something that can be unique to you as well. We actually kind of shared this as well with the label that the original track was signed to, and it actually went on to get supported by Paul Van Dyk and a few people like that. So that's basically the end of today's session and pretty much the end of our seminar content here at BMC. So thank you very much for popping along.